Hi, I'm Jared Lombardo, and welcome to Episode 6 of the Conventional Podcast. So far, this show has mostly been about entertainment events. There are many more business-related conferences occurring all the time. These conferences can sometimes be dry, but they can also be fun and engaging. DevOps Days is a worldwide series of technical conferences covering software development, IT infrastructure operations, and the intersection between them. Each event is run by volunteers from the local area.
So I'm KellyShkuratoff, and I'm the lead organizer for the conference DevOps Days Vancouver, a totally volunteer-run event that happens every year around April.
How'd you get started with the DevOps Days organization?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. It wasn't on purpose. It was absolutely accidental. They reached out to me about giving a talk. It would have been my first public talk, and I definitely thought, ooh, I don't know about that. So anyway, I did submit a talk, and I thought, well, at least they'll never select. Oh, crap, I've been selected. So that's how I first heard about and sort of became involved in the event as a speaker. And the following year, one of the organizers sort of brought me aside and said, hey, I'd love to have you help organize with DevOps Days Vancouver. And I said, no. That's not exactly my bag. And then he said, well, yeah, I think it is. In fact, I would like to give you the conference. I would like you to help organize this year, and I would like to give it to you as my successor for leading this event.
How did that go? Why'd you say yes if you didn't want it?
So flattery will get you everywhere, I suppose. I said, well, why on earth would you pick me? And he said, well, you seem like you get shit done. So that's how I started helping out with DevOps Days Vancouver.
Prior to DevOps Days, had you had any organizational anything at a conference or event management or wedding planning or anything before?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. I did plan my wedding, pretty elaborate, I suppose, or as far as the planning goes anyway. I just pretty much make a backlog of tasks and I plow through it. In my younger days, I worked with a summer position for an events and marketing company. They sent us all over kind of BC just doing promo stuff, set up a big tent, give things away, draws, what have you. So I did a bit of that before, but I'd never run an event sort of at this scale. So I spent 1 year organizing, doing all of their sponsorship. Reaching out to sponsors, arranging funding, that kind of thing, meeting them day of. And then the following year was all on me to kind of take over and try to steer the ship.
So in that first year where you were doing sponsorship and the previous director was still there, what kind of things were you doing so that you'd be ready for the next year?
Mostly it's observing what needs to happen and when, right? There's an order of events, food, venue, this and that. It all kind of has a natural cadence. There's an ebb and flow that goes on throughout the year, and kind of observing when the quieter times are, when it's busy, and particularly when you need more help. Obviously, there's a number of people who help organize this event, other awesome folks, as well as sort of day of and closer to volunteers with varying levels of commitment that they can give, given that everyone typically has another, full-time position and this is a volunteer event. So just sort of observing the cadence of when help is needed, how many people it takes to run what. That was primarily what I was looking at.
Why do you still do it when it wasn't, your main thing?
That's a good question. I think for me, I like the people that attend the event. Vancouver has sort of a vibrant tech community, but pretty close-knit, right? People care about community, and the event that we run is half speakers and sort of pre-prepared talks and half open discussion format, open spaces. Seeing everybody talk about what's going on in our industry, about what's going on in the community is of real interest to me. I love seeing that vibrant chat go on, as well as female organizers. We didn't have any prior to me, so it's important to have representation sort of that way, and helps me attract female speakers. I know particularly I sit in the front row and I look at my speakers and I look engaged, and they look back at me and they look engaged. There's usually at least one person in the year that comes up to me, and maybe this person says, well, Kelly, I looked out and I was nervous and I saw you looking at me and you were smiling. And then I felt really good about being on stage. And then I was smiling. And this particular female presenter, did just a great job on her talk, and those moments stay with me, and that's why I organize this event.
That sounds great. You know that I also volunteer at this event, and I'm just running around doing other things. So it's like a completely different side of what happens at the event that you're seeing there.
That was me 2 years ago. Don't worry about that.
Well, yeah, but I don't want your job.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. So when you go to other conferences as an attendee or as a guest, are you learning things to bring back, or are you keeping it separate? Just how do you interact with other shows as a response to being in this one?
Oh, I'm definitely looking at other events. What are they doing for crowd control, unique things for sort of ticketing? We're always thinking about, do we want to sell different days, or is it always multi-day, or how do we identify different participants or overflow seating or other things? Sort of how do we crowd control? So I'm keeping an eye on the way that people are doing that. Lineups, it's kind of like weddings, right? A buffet, when there's a really long line, it's like nobody's happy, or when the food is bad, nobody's happy. It's kind of the same principles pretty much apply across the board. When the food is good and people kind of get what they want, and then they get to move on to chatting with other people, that's kind of things that they notice, in addition to obviously good content. But a lot of the logistics around just the way the event runs, and are people spending time with people as opposed to spending time in lines, and are people getting where they need to go easily? That's definitely something I keep an eye out for.
So unrelated to the show itself, you were originally invited as a speaker. How did you get into the space to even be a speaker in this community?
I have no idea how he found me. One of the organizers reached out to me, I think on LinkedIn or email. We weren't working at the same company. I have no idea how he found me. I think I've always gravitated towards projects that are hard to do and take a lot of organization. The project that I gave that first public talk about was one that sort of was a multi-year project to roll through Salesforce and roll out some configuration management tooling. But the interesting thing was we integrated with just a ton of other teams. It took a ton of training. They flew me to Dublin, they flew me to Singapore, and I did multi-day training, sometimes 4 or 5 days in those regions, to train people on what we were doing, to kind of get change happening the way that we wanted. And that took a fair amount of organization to do. So I think I always liked big projects that were hard to do and had a lot of dependencies, and you track when these things need to happen and how they need to happen and who is aware and who's participating versus who's just observing right now, and how do you get that ball rolling. So maybe they liked my content in the talk, who knows? But that kind of brought me into the event, and the same skills that I used on that project that I gave that talk about definitely carry forward into what I do now for DevOps Days.
So for the conference itself, what are some of the techniques or tools you use to keep organized? You mentioned building a backlog and then just working through it. How do you make sure you don't miss things?
I think it was harder in the first year than it is once you get going. Once you kind of know the cadence of things that need to happen, things tend to pop up, as well as you have relationships with your vendors, so they almost remind you, like, hey, don't forget, do you want to renew for next year? Absolutely. That was great. Love to have you again. Done and done. For me, it's usually just I keep a backlog in a agenda doc. Things that are relevant now, we definitely discuss weekly or bi-weekly, depending on what's going on. And then as the sort of conference gets closer, then I start pulling agenda items up from my to-do later bin. And I start discussing them weekly and just go through it that way. As to everything that needs to happen, we keep, records of all our meeting minutes from the previous years, what happened when, Google Drive folders, that kind of thing. I've experimented with using like Trello or another task board, but for the most part, we keep it pretty low key.
One thing that was new this year was adding in the use of paper call for the papers or the speaker applications. How was it done in the past, and how was it better with that tool this year?
Oh my God, I think that changed our lives. It was awesome. Someone in our group suggested it, and someone managed to set up an in-kind sponsorship with PaperCall, so we got to try it out for this year. It would definitely be worth paying for and using again in the future for us. In the past, we used basically Google Forms for proposals, that didn't give people great options to see what was submitted. We did a lot of ranking in spreadsheets, which was very difficult and unfortunate, and did not make it quick for people to figure out. If people came sort of late to the game or were on holidays and had to come back and start ranking, it didn't even give people a good idea of where to spend their time. So the new tooling definitely helped us prioritize who we looked at and how. Maybe, half the organizers made it through everything in full, and then there were some people who came late for whatever reason, sort of to the evaluation party, and we said, all right, take the top 50% and work through ranking those as well. So it gave us an easy way to optimize people's time to still get their input without them having to do the whole swath of every proposal. But at least every talk got a number of us looking at it for sure, and we could see who had done that and make sure that everybody got a chance and everybody was covered.
So since you've been involved in DevOps Days, is there much interaction with the other DevOps Days, from city to city, because there's many of them in the org, or has this made you want to be more involved with either other DevOps Days or other conferences?
I'd be interested in trying my luck as a speaker again, I think. We tend to have some speakers come in from other DevOps Days, even that are organizers. I mean, I know between Seattle and Vancouver, given that we're fairly geographically close, I know people from that event do come up and down. We also, if we can, try to be careful about not organizing both of these West Coast events too close together, both from a sponsorship perspective and from just making sure that people have time to attend or put together talks. We try to space those out if we can. This year we didn't do a great job at that. But yeah, I would love to attend some of the other DevOps Days events. They look great. And the new website they put together that kind of unifies all the events, even though they're all run independently, is really great for poking around, seeing how many DevOps Days events have happened. I did a quick trend look this year, and we're up to, I think, 69 events planned this year for DevOps Days, all individually organized, all individually run by, or for the most part, sort of organized by people passionate about the space. So that's really exciting as well. There are too many events there to really attend them all. That would be a full-time job in and of itself, probably. But I would love to attend at least a couple, and I'd love to have a chance at speaking again, I think.
Yeah, with like 69 events around the year, that's more than one event per week on average, and that would be a full-time job with all the travel, because they're everywhere. Like not every country, but a lot of countries around the world. Are there things you've learned from the convention, like from the operations of the convention, that you've taken back to your day job to adjust how you do things at work?
I think being the lead organizer of this event reminds me to ask for help more often and sooner, even in my regular job. Things get busy, maybe, you kind of take things on. And for this event, everyone's volunteers. You think, well, I'll just do it myself. Or maybe I don't need someone, or maybe other people are busy as well. It's kind of hard to know what people's schedules are, given that it's just a part-time gig for us. But, I think it's always a good reminder to ask for help. When something comes up, if you can't get to it, don't take it all on yourself, and get good at delegating. And even though I'm a manager in my current job, sometimes I'm not always good at it. So I think this event reminds me to definitely take that forward into my day job as well, and make sure I'm spreading things around as needed.
Yeah, no, that's good. Like, getting better at delegating is something that I always have to deal with myself, and just generally being more organized is something that I've learned from my years in conferences. It's just like, well, things going to happen on the day, and, well, it'll happen as well as you've planned it, and no better. So you have to just find a way to, see how the pieces come together and have them organized. And well, anyway, that makes projects at work go smoother, having done that.
And I think to some extent it's how well it's been planned, and then sort of some things are just going to happen as they're going to happen. One thing I've learned is every year, well, this would be my third year as an organizer on this event, and every year we think, we're going to do this earlier, we're going to do this faster. But some of the realities are that everyone's constrained. Everyone has full-time jobs. there's only so much time people can actually spend. So despite our best efforts, sometimes things just didn't happen any earlier than last year or happened later. And you got to kind of get a little bit right with that. I mean, it's still going to be a great event. This year's event was better than ever, even though some things didn't happen earlier or better necessarily than they did the past year. We are careful to do a retro. We think about what we've done last year, but sometimes we just don't get to everything anyway. And I think a little bit of sort of water off a duck's back or, letting a few things go is totally acceptable, and just realize that everyone is constrained. That also carries through to my regular job. Sometimes despite your best intentions to get on top of something, just doesn't happen. It's just going to happen as it's going to happen.
So some shows they run more than one event per year, and so they're always like planning the next event now. But with a show that's running just annually with kind of a downtime in between, how do you make sure that when you're planning the next one, the stuff that you brought up in the retro is actually used?
Typically, we capture that into a retro document. We have a number of shared collaborators that hop on there, especially day of. Day of is the most important time to capture it as the event is happening. A lot of people take notes on their phones. A few people are better than others, are more diligent at reminding people to do that. We try to get it down into a doc as soon as possible. Absolute worst case, we try to get some of those points down in like an organizer's dinner or something after the fact if we didn't manage to pull it together. But then in the following year, usually we do a kickoff, say 4 months later or so, 4 or 5 months later, for the greater group of organizers / volunteers a little bit more broadly. And one of the first action items for the next year's meeting is let's look at the retro. So you always kind of create that cadence of, even though the retro might have sat there for 3-4 months, you bring that up first at your next section and kind of add yourself some to-dos for the following year.
So other than the pay-per-call software, what was the biggest new good thing this year compared to the previous year?
We had excellent food this year. No, that's not the biggest new thing.
The food was definitely better. The new caterer and throwing more money at the problem definitely helped.
We pretty much had infinite food. So the retro included stretchier pants. But coming into sort of what we did differently this year, part of our unconference session is voting on topics the community would like to discuss. The beauty of this conference is half of the content is pre-planned and half of it is community-driven, right? People bring these ideas that they want to talk about with the community, and then they do that. The difficulty is, in the past, we've been running it with Post-it notes and whiteboards and sort of voting with markers, right? Put your dot on this topic that you want to discuss, and we'll tally those up and schedule those into rooms. But as we've grown, I think we reached towards sort of 350 people this year. That gets really difficult to get a lot of people crowded around topics and get everybody's votes in and get those topics up fast enough and scheduled into rooms. So one of our other organizers, Kyle, he wrote basically an app to handle all that. People just pull it up on their smartphone and they can vote for what they like. Topics appear pretty much in real time in the palm of their hand, and voting was super easy. We had a few growing pains as we had to spin up extra capacity on the fly to handle the workload, but pretty much revolutionized that process. It meant, in the break, people knew where to go next. They were ready for what topics there were. We spent pretty much no time scheduling, given that he wrote all the automation to basically put the most popular topics into rooms by size automatically, which was awesome. And everybody got to spend their lunch hour talking to other people instead of trying to queue up and squint at our poor, shoddy handwriting of what topics were what. So that was a huge leap for us.
Well, not just our shoddy handwriting, everyone's shoddy handwriting, because, the presenters often wrote their own tags for the board in previous years.
That's true. Everybody got a chance to have terrible handwriting on a Post-it note that hundreds of people had to look at. Correct.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that software. Even though it was just a couple months ago, that was a huge help compared to the previous year. And then they used it again at Polyglot, the Polyglot Unconference, and that seemed to go super smoothly too.
This year, we don't have to put that in our retro as do better next year.
Yeah, and when we talked about it last year, it was like, oh, that might be hard. We'll see if someone gets to it. And then someone got to it.
Gosh, we've got a whole room full of developers, and writing a small app seems quite difficult for us to get to. Oh, wait, Kyle did it pretty much overnight. Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. So having not really started planning for the 2019 DevOps Days.
You're right,
Vancouver,
we're already behind.
Well,
but thanks for pointing that out.
Well, but it's not, you said like 4 or 5 months of downtime. We're in that window. That's fine. But having not really planned yet, what are you looking forward to or excited about next year or future years as the conference develops?
That's a good question. We're interested in when we kind of have the turning point to potentially produce multiple tracks for the content. It takes more effort to get more speakers. I think PaperCall, actually speaking to things it's done for us, we got a lot broader content. I mean, some of it is people going, I'm holding a shotgun and everything looks like a target. I've got this topic and I want to present it anywhere. So we did get some of that as well, but we did get more papers that were applicable from more varied groups and more varied locations than we have in the past. So that was really nice because they do a bit of sort of publishing your event on their website so people can see it as a listing. Oh, hey, it's a DevOps Days. I can present at DevOps Days. What are my options? As well, I think it might encourage quieter people to potentially come forward and put in papers because the online system makes it pretty easy. So I'm interested in whether we get enough papers to dual track or not. It definitely doesn't make sense to do that if we don't have enough good content to fill multiple sessions. But if we're almost getting towards that, right? If we are getting the content that we like, that may change the way we run our event. And that would be sort of something definitely new for us to try to organize.
So one thing I mentioned earlier, and then just now hearing about the future plans of growing to a second track, is the thing I mentioned earlier was spending more money on the food. Part of that is because of the sponsorships. How does the sponsorship process work, and what are the sponsors really getting? Like, what value do you believe they're seeing from this show?
We never have a problem getting sponsors, or we haven't typically in the past. Obviously, knock on wood on that. Our sort of sponsorship support has been really great. The event itself, we typically don't market as a big expo floor. We aren't really aiming for that. We are aiming for sponsors to send technical people to be at their booth and talk tech with the folks that are there. So the kinds of sponsorships we get usually have people who have something technical to discuss with others. To some extent, there's obviously recruiting. Everything's a thinly veiled recruiting event, basically. Also, come work for DevOps Days. But our sponsorship process is usually we reach out to people we know in Vancouver, particularly people who are new, people who are growing. We have a number of repeat supporters, maybe not every year, but every other year. This year we had a platinum sponsor who was one of ours, like original DevOps Days back in the early days, even before I was involved in the event. They were one of our sponsors. So it's really great to sort of see continued support year after year from a number of local folks. We run, sort of standard tiers of platinum, gold, silver, bronze, as well as a friends and community sponsorship, which is priced very affordably for companies under 50. So even small companies have a chance to support our event at a price that's totally reasonable and make sure a few of their folks get to attend as well.
Yes, one thing that I've enjoyed about being in Vancouver is there's always meetups going on, and there's a bunch of small tech conferences that are really affordable and accessible to startup companies and individuals. And I just didn't really experience that when I've been in other places.
I mean, I think what sort of, speaking to what sponsors get out of this, their people that attend get the same thing that everyone else gets out of this event, which is a chance to actually talk tech with other people in the community. Perhaps even more so than just a marketing booth. We're hiring. We do have some tech people, but it's almost entirely a selling pitch. I find that more so sponsors at this event are there for conversation. Interest in what other companies are doing, how people are growing. Oh, we solved that tech problem as well. We did it this way, we did it that way. We typically tell people it's not about the booth. This particular event is not about a lot of banners. We don't even give people a ton of table space, to be honest. There's no like inflatable monkeys or whatever else that, makes up your company's standard fare. No judgment on inflatable monkeys. I'm sure they're great. But, typically we say it's about the people you send, it's not about the booth. And I think it's a chance for companies to make that connection. I also think Vancouver job market is cautious. People tend to do a lot of referrals, and maybe that's true everywhere, but, people are very tentative about moving. They almost don't move somewhere until they know someone and they know what it's like and they think about it, and people are cautious. It's almost like dating, right? Sometimes it's like, I'm not ready to date a new company. And sometimes it's like, well, I could go for coffee, and I think this event is a good way to jumpstart that, right? There's lots of chances to have coffee. There's lots of chances to be in the same discussion session and have someone hear what you're about without necessarily having to pursue them directly. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to make those connections for companies that you don't necessarily have somewhere else. It doesn't have discussion sessions or as much sort of group time together.
Given that the second half of the day is unconference format, are there things you would want to do to be sure that you're encouraging the content you want to have?
I mean, being the lead organizer, I definitely nag people throughout the day as I MC. Don't forget, bring your great ideas. Think about what you want to do. We do a bit of sort of priming the pump around. Think about a time you did X or did Y. That might be something that's interesting for discussion. We also encourage our speakers to feel free to sort of start a discussion topic around their space or around whatever they've just discussed, because I find people are pretty hungry to discuss that a little bit more, particularly people that might not feel as comfortable putting their hand up in a room of 300 and doing that. They're maybe in a room of 30, they may be more happy to do that. So it gives that sort of interactivity for maybe a variety of confidence levels or, people who might have a question but just aren't comfortable asking it. As to the content that we get, I don't know how much you can steer on conference. You can try, but, some of it is what people would like to talk about. We can do a bit of topic sharing. If two topics are somewhat similar, we can steer it more towards the other or combine them, and we definitely do that. It's a bit of a sort of strategy of like, well, that's kind of close to this topic, and this one might be more popular, or this one might have more interest, and this one might not. So we try to kind of steer those together a little bit, and then the content will kind of go where it goes as people discuss it. We definitely, of course, have a code of conduct and avoid anything we shouldn't have, or, topics that would be inappropriate. And we try to definitely keep topics on a positive note if we can, particularly large sessions. But, there's only so much we can do.
Around the code of conduct, have there been any issues in the past? Or has this been a fairly safe show? You did mention that until you joined, there were no female organizers.
Actually, we've never had, so we have a phone service. They provide basically an in-kind sponsorship to us for a number you can text if you have any issues that redirects to one of our organizers. And we always have a very lovely, friendly organizer standing by. No one has ever needed to use it that we can tell. For the most part, it's a pretty comfortable event, I would say. Limited problems. We once had one issue, was actually against myself, and I had someone looking out for me. But, to the extent that it was, I don't think it was particularly difficult. This person had a few drinks and was a little chatty / grabby.
So you mentioned the drinks. There's an evening event as part of the conference, and it's more hallway talk kind of time. But people are getting drinks. Has that part ever been an issue, or does that usually just extend the good feelings of the day?
I think people look forward to the event. People like to have that kind of downtime. We plied people with so much food they could probably hardly move this year. There were drinks as well, but it hasn't typically been particularly out of hand or anything else. I usually stick around to the end and pay for the event, and then folks head home and we kick it off the next day. Given that it's between days, if people want to make the next day also, people are probably kind of careful about what they're doing. Organizers hang on to tickets. We do a ticketed event. It is technically open bar, but we keep an eye out on whether someone has had enough or not. I think once I indicated that someone might have had enough, and they said, "You're right. I'll have some water, and then I'll probably go home." And that was kind of the sum total of what happened there. 2 years ago at our party, the power went out and the whole bar went dark. As it turns out, someone released a giant flock of birthday balloons that got caught into the power lines and blew a transformer in Yaletown. So actually, we couldn't leave because we couldn't pay. So we finished out our party sitting in a semi-dark bar waiting for things to wrap up. But it was still pretty fun.
So related to the scheduling, you've got the event between the 2 days of the show, and the show is Friday, Saturday, at least the past few years. Many other professional conferences are on weekdays. Why the Friday, Saturday split?
It's interesting. I think we ask that question every year. Do we want to continue that? Do we want to change? If you work for a company that probably bought your ticket and probably gives you time to attend, weekdays would be great for you. Weekdays would be perfect. But some companies, people just don't get the time. People would like to attend. They don't have the time. And in that case, maybe they come for the Friday evening and do the networking, and then they come on Saturday. Usually our weekday attendance on the Friday session is better than our weekend attendance on the Saturday. But then again, I know that there are people that come Saturday. They just aren't able to come on Friday. It may also depend on childcare. If your spouse or partner can, help you out one day and not the other, or, you have daycare one day but not the other, or the inverse. That gives people a chance to attend that might not otherwise attend. And we definitely do, let people sort of swap badges with other people, or, people only come one day sometimes. And I think we're okay with that. We're trying to be as accommodating as possible to make sure that everybody who wants to participate does get to participate.
Would you suggest that other 2-day conferences follow your trend?
I don't know. Some of these situations can be mitigated by other strategies, like we've offered to arrange childcare, which may help some people who couldn't otherwise attend on weekdays attend. Or we've done things like sort of arrange for free tickets, or, tickets for those who maybe are students or could not otherwise attend. So there are some ways to mitigate people who can attend, potentially. I don't know. It is quieter on Saturday. I personally, as a conference attendee, would rather attend on weekdays and have my weekends to myself. So I don't know if that translates to our whole audience or not, and it may be something we experiment in the next year or two.
Do you have the dates set for next year's show yet, or is that still in the works?
Way to remind me I'm behind, Jared. Way to remind me. I think we'll probably have that firmed up in the next week or two. Unfortunately, we always seem to host it pretty much on my birthday or around, so really cramps my style. Actually, one year they got the audience to sing happy birthday to me, and I was mortified.
We should probably just make that a tradition then.
So the dates are not going to be in April this year. That's what I'm saying. We're going to push a little bit towards May, and we can get my other main organizer's birthday instead. That would be perfect.
Thank you so much for chatting, Kelly.
Thanks for making my Monday a little bit better, Jared.
You're welcome. Show notes and a feedback form are available at conventionalpodcast.com, and you can reach out to me on Twitter at conventionalpod or by email at conventionalpodcast@gmail.com. Please let me know if you have any comments about the show or suggestions for guests. Thanks for listening.